Welcome to the Sons of Mjolnir podcast.
The Sons of... what?
This isn't your Sons of Macaroni, yeah!
The Sons of Mjolnir?
This is Sons of Mjolnir, yeah!
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Sons of Mjolnir podcast. We're glad you're here today. As always, I'm one of your hosts, Gorgon.
I'm Fat Thor.
And today we are very excited. We are very proud today on our podcast, we get to have Mr. Cullen Bunn, the master of horror himself. You probably know him from a lot of his work from Uncanny X-Men, Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, Venom, The Empty Man, Parasomnia, Basilisk, Night by Night, and more. Mr. Bunn, thank you so much for coming on today. We're really excited to have you.
Well, thanks for talking with me. Glad to be here.
Of course. I mean, Gorgon was, going off of some of your work. I think we could literally sit here all day and just keep naming off your titles, man. You're literally everywhere. The bun business is booming, as people would say. I mean, it's crazy.
That what they say?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. But
right.
like I said, you're everywhere, man. You're writing so many books, and we cannot be more excited to get into all this stuff with you.
Well, I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, so usually on the show, we usually kind of start off with, your typical comic origin story. And, we've had a couple other horror writers on, and we've kind of talked about their horror origin. And so just to kind of kick things off, so our audience and people listening can kind of get to know you a little better. So you've talked about that you started reading comics basically when you started to read. That's how you kind of started reading, was from comics. You've mentioned X-Men as kind of one of your earliest memories of reading comics. Something that I thought was super, super interesting is you actually in 5th grade wrote a comic, X Laser Nights, featuring all of your friends. And you joked that you had a weekly release even back then. So I thought that was super cool. And you also talked about actually selling your own comics at local Comic-Con, stuff like that. So my question is, I thought this was very interesting. You said that when you were younger, if you could talk to yourself when you were younger, that one of the a piece of advice you would give yourself is to believe in yourself. But I thought, like I said, at 5th grade, you're writing comics already. You're going to cons. That seems like someone who believes in himself a little bit. And you also said that you just have always wanted to tell stories. So I'm curious, being a young kid writing comics like that and kind of feeling like you don't really believe in yourself, where do you think that kind of innate desire to tell stories came from?
Part of it is my dad was always sort of a natural born storyteller. And my dad was this guy who could talk to anybody. Everybody loved him. He never met someone who wasn't his friend. Mm-hmm. And I never inherited that. I didn't get that. I never understood it. I have always been a painfully shy person. I don't do well, especially meeting people for the first time, talking to people. I just don't have that skill set. And I thought telling stories would be a way for me to connect with people that I can't do in my day-to-day. Like, I just can't do that. So that's part of it, is I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to tell stories. I also thought, hey, it's a way for me to communicate in a bigger way than I'm typically able to. And then, beyond that, I just love these. These are the kind of things I love. I love horror. I love comics. I love movies. I love all that stuff. So I wanted to be in the thick of it. I've just always liked the idea of creating something.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, can I say you're damn good at it too, my friend? And you talk about like you're shy and stuff like that, which I 100% relate to, which I know kind of sounds weird since I host a podcast and I'm on the internet like every day of the week, but I totally relate to that too. And like trying to connect with people through these stories. But you kind of touch on this a little bit, and something else I want to talk about from your early years that you're a fascinating guy, my friend. You like, the more I learn about you, I'm just like, man, this guy, I could talk to this guy for hours. He's just so interesting.
The good news is most of they're all lies.
Yeah. Well, I know.
All
So
life.
you got let's see, if I remember correctly, you got like alien autopsist, or alien scientist, a Sasquatch hunter, all those things. But the thing I wanted to ask you about, which is true, is being the world's youngest hypnotist. So your dad was actually a professional hypnotist.
Correct.
And another thing that you talked about that I thought was super interesting was when you're growing up in North Carolina, you grew up in a small town, let's see, Newton Grove, city of opportunity.
Newton Grove, part of the time. Yeah, I mean, I lived in many towns
Mm-hmm.
in North Carolina, but Newton Grove was when I was very young, for sure.
Yeah, well, the story that I'm referencing specifically is you talked about the sheriff coming speeding rapidly down your street, coming to your house.
Where do you find these nonsense stories? I mean, that's a true story, but I don't even remember telling that. But okay, yeah.
Hey, we do our research over here, Mr. Bunn. But to go along with the story, like you were saying, is speeding down the road, comes to your house and is screaming or telling you about how there's UFOs abducting people in town.
Yeah, I can't remember if he was saying they were abducting, but he definitely was saying there was like a UFO flying over the Tasty Freeze in the middle of town,
which is just absolutely insanity. But along with that, and your dad being a hypnotist, and like you were saying, you grew up in kind of a bunch of different kind of rural, more Midwest towns. I'm curious, with being the horror guy and like the legendary horror writer, do you have any other kind of stories maybe or experiences from your younger days that influence your spooky stories? And are you kind of a believer in the supernatural and whatnot in your personal life?
I want to be a believer. I'm probably a little bit too much of a skeptic, but I really wish things were, I really wish I could believe in everything. And yeah, look, the sheriff drove to the house screaming about a UFO when I was very little, and that freaked me out. That same house, one afternoon we went somewhere and we came back and it was infested with locusts. They were just crawling through the house in blankets.
My gosh.
And, years, maybe a few years later. Well, that's the same house, and I've told this story many times. That's the same house that I was looking out the back window, and a man crawled out from under the house, and he crawled across our yard, and he picked an apple off the tree, and then he crawled back under the house.
What?
And that,
dude,
I remember watching that, and I yelled for my mom, "There's a man under the house!" And she called my dad. And he came home from work and like crawled under the house, and the man was no longer there, but there were a lot of apple cores under the house. He'd been picking and eating apples for a while.
That's crazy. That's a crazy story.
I mean, you don't grow up in the country and not see some weird stuff. I mean, I used to say, I know people always talk about, oh, you live in the city. If you live in the city, that's dangerous. It's like, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. You don't know what real danger's like. Not until you've faced off with some country guy who's crazy as hell and has seen a UFO flying over the damn Tasty Freeze. Yeah. That's danger.
Eating apples under your house.
Right, guys, itinerant people walking around stealing apples from your tree.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you about it, because like I said, not only is it very super interesting, I think, but I'm from a small cornfield town outside of Chicago. Gorgon's from, Texas, Oklahoma. So I definitely relate to, like you said, things are a little spookier out. Like I'm in LA now, so it's like completely different. But like Midwest, it's spooky out there in like the cornfields and the woods and whatnot. Yeah. It can get spooky out there. So I was curious, again, being the horror guy, I feel like you got some experiences that you're pulling from for some of your work, especially for Crooked Hills, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, well, Crooked Hills is pretty much a love letter to those kind of stories and things you see and things that happen. But yeah, I mean, it's throughout my life, there was always something weird going on. And, some people would say, well, if you look for it, if you're on the lookout for it, you're going to find the weirdness, because let's face it, it's a weird world. It's a weird place. But there was always stuff. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I was driving. I mean, and I still have these, there's still weird stuff goes on. Just a few weeks ago, I was driving back from Kansas City, and I don't know what I saw. I swear there was something in the field across the highway. It was massive, and it was like a semi-translucent, luminescent dome, and it had these giant sails that were moving from around it. And I passed it, and I was like, "Well, I have no idea what I was looking. I have no idea what I just saw. I've never seen anything like that out in the darkness." And I considered turning around, hitting the next exit, crossing, going back down the highway just to get a look at it again.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, nah, because it's probably going to be like just something normal, and it's more interesting. It's more interesting just to think I saw something really bizarre out there in the field.
Yeah. I was gonna say either
Or-
something very normal or something insanely crazy, and then I'm like, you've
Or-
written enough horror stories to know, like, maybe you should just keep going.
Well, yeah, and, I told my wife about it, and she's like, "Oh, that's weird. Some friends of mine posted these weird lights that were flying over their town, not far from where you were." And I was like, "Well, who the hell knows? Maybe it's that damn Tasty Freeze UFOs back again.
Damn Tasty Freeze, they're coming back for you."
Right.
I like what you say that it's better to imagine that it was something else instead of something normal, right? In the realm of writing horror, I feel like that's probably a pretty good mentality to have. And I would imagine a lot of the horror that you've said inspires you, those writers probably have that same mentality. You've said before you're inspired by Bill Mantlo, that you're inspired by Alan Moore, Stephen King, Dean Koontz, all these great writers in their stories of it all. I feel like they would probably have that same mentality, particular David Cronenberg, whose horror movies you very much love too. I feel like when I was reading your Sinestro and your Lobo runs in the New 52 era for DC, for some of the monsters in the background, I kind of got a Cronenberg-esque feel from on it.
Oh, I've never thought about that, but you're probably right. There definitely. I mean, I'm certain there are, if I get the chance to work in a little body horror and sort of that weird, surreal, what the hell just happened kind of horror, even in superhero books, I want to do it. And yeah, Sinestro gave me that opportunity. There were a lot of those Yellow Lanterns that I just was able to touch on just briefly, even, and not, just to see them, glimpse them there in the backgrounds.
It's one of my favorite runs. I've actually talked on the show a bit on it. We had an episode where we talked about our favorite underrated runs of all time. And I regularly talk about how much I loved your New 52 Lobo and Sinestro together at that time, because for me as a young comic book reader, that was something that it was a different take on the characters that the older version didn't make me care of. And it was probably the runs that started making me care about writers, right? When you're young, you care about characters and stories. You go, oh, I like Spider-Man. So you just pick up Spider-Man. But picking those up together, I was like, who is writing this? And that was the first stories that made me go, who is writing this? And then I started looking for your work. I credit you as being the writer who did that. And you kind of are what led me to Symbiotes, which I have a massive fascination with. I'm kind of our symbiote person on the podcast. How does it feel for the guy who's wrote so many different symbiote stories to be able to look at where symbiotes have come now, right? Because you started in symbiotes back when Venom was a lot of people still looked at Venom as this bad villain, right, attached to Spider-Man. But you were right there in the forefront of it all in helping give Eddie Brock purpose, in having Flash Thompson become Agent Venom. You threw in Andy Benton, who got Mania, who is now one of the most beloved hosts of all time, with so much backstory to her. You've been integral from them all the way up through the Absolute Carnage Scream, VenomVerse, now in Death of VenomVerse. How does it feel to be able to sit there and be like, damn, what I did changed so much for where we are now?
Well, it's bittersweet, to be honest. It's a little hard sometimes to talk about it, only because I loved Flash Thompson as Venom, and I loved Andy Benton. She's my favorite character that I ever created. I created a number of characters for Marvel that were all quickly forgotten. But Andy's the one that I really loved, and Declan Shalvey and I came up with a design of the character that I still say her design of Mania is one of the best designs of a character in years. So it's bitter. It's really cool to see how far Venom has come now, and how it's it's so. Let's be honest, it's so bonkers. I mean, the Venom story is just completely bonkers now, and that's cool and that's really neat. But man, I don't like where Mania is. Man, by that I mean she's not. There is no Mania, and I don't like that. I don't. I would love. I would love to write a Flash and Mania story again. But the thing is, I feel like those characters. I'm not sure those characters exist in the tone of Venom, because Flash and Mania should be a little more grounded. Flash and Andy, that's a little more grounded of a story, I think. And that sort of the relationship between the two of them was something that was quickly just forgotten. And that, that's always bugged me, and as much as I try to tilt that windmill of getting Mania back, it's just never going to happen. There is for whatever reason, I feel like there's a dislike of Mania when it comes to the Marvel offices. But I've tried, and I mean, I'll try again. I'll keep trying, but I would love to do more with Mania.
Well, the fans certainly love Mania. We talk on it on Twitter all the time. Andy Benton had become host of Scream and then host of Silence, and the fans seem to enjoy Silence because it seemed like it brought back that relationship with Flash. Right.
Yeah,
she was carrying something that was part from him, even though she's older now. I saw a fan talking on Twitter the other day, and they're like, what would be really cool if Cullen Bunn got to come in and write someone new who picks up Mania, and now Andy is having to coach them the way Flash coached Andy, and she's having to constantly go to Flash and be like, hey, what do I do about this?
It's one of those weird things. Every character is somebody's favorite character. Even these characters that you've never, and one of my, I guess it was the editor of Venom at the time, when the way things work is, let's boost sales, so we'll end this run and start it with a new writer or do something, and that's fine. But I remember he told me, he said, you can always take this with you, is Mania is somebody's favorite character and always will be.
Absolutely.
And that's that's always heartening. Yeah, I'd love to. I'd probably fall all over myself to write. There's a number of projects that I wouldn't rush to try to do again, but writing Flash or Mania or Andy, writing Sinestro, writing Magneto, those kind of characters I would probably rush to do. I'd be excited to write those characters again.
Would Andy and them fall into your Venom story you've talked about before that you've pitched that never got to come true, your Venom the Descent? Would they fall into that?
Well, Andy was key to the Descent back when she had her Helm Arc. It was always, and look, this was always me I was trying to game the system in a lot of ways. I was trying to do some things and tell a bigger story than I knew I would ever get to tell. So some of that, shame on me, right? I knew that this would never happen. But I wrote a book called Fear Itself, the Fearless. And in that book, I turned Damian Hellstrom into a villain. And he's the son of Satan. Come on, guys. Anyway, but he started talking about the Descent. And then when I took over Venom, I had Hellstrom in that book. And I always intended, and then I knew, okay, Venom's going to get canceled at some point, and I'll work the Descent into some other book, and we can, roll Andy into that and everything. So it was always me trying to fit, pieces in together that I could tell a longer story, maybe across several books. With the Descent, it just never happened, and it just kind of was forgotten. But yeah, Andy was a key part of the Descent, which was And to some degree, I don't even remember everything it was about. I remember that it was something to do with Mephisto stepping down or someone becoming the new ruler of hell in the Marvel universe. And it was intended that one of the Marvel characters would eventually become this new ruler of hell in Marvel. And Andy was in the running for that. I had plans that Magic from the X-Men, who's also a favorite character of mine, was going to enter that realm and maybe potentially be. Even later when I took over X-Men, I introduced this like dark version of the X-Men that were from a supernatural worlds that I called the Hexmen. And I even thought, man, if I can just get the Hexmen to just have a chance to really do something with them, I can circle back to the Descent again. And that's probably, maybe Marvel just got tired of me trying to work these storylines out or behind the scenes, and trying to make these things happen.
They're like, all right, Cullen, we got it. The Descent, Night Stalkers, we got it on our list.
All these things I keep trying to make happen. And now I'll pitch a book and I'll say, all right, and we'll work in the Descent. I'm like, that book was 15 years old. No one remembers, no one wants that except you.
We want it.
I think it could fly. We did a fan pitch episode a while back. Our listeners and viewers will remember, where I talked about what I would do as a Venom writer if I got to write Venom as a fan. And Andy still has the Hell Mark. And Mephisto has a bit of a symbiote that came directly from Null in a cage in Hell. And my fan pitch would be that causing a problem in Hell, and her Hellmark being the only way she can protect the symbiotes to go down there and help with the Ghost Riders and fight this war in Hell to keep it from emerging. I think you could still find a way to make that work today. I think the pieces are all still there, my friend. I'd read it. It'd be on my pull list tomorrow.
Yeah, look, I love that. I grew up reading Marvel comics in the era, you mentioned Uncanny X-Men earlier, and Chris Claremont, one of the things he was just an absolute master at was seeding these little story ideas that would not pay off for years. There'd be some little thing that, and it just seemed oddball out of nowhere. Here's a character that just shows up for a second on a panel, and that is a huge story element that pays off years down the line. And that is what I loved about superhero comics more than anything, was that feeling that, I remember reading about this guy, I remember him being in there, and this is just all paying off. And Claremont he could play the long game better than anybody. And comics just aren't built that way anymore, unfortunately. I mean, Marvel and DC books, they just aren't built that way. And I don't know that. I mean, I think there's definitely readers who still want that kind of thing, but I think the vast majority of readers need that payoff. We need it now. Let's, I can't wait. I don't want to wait for that. And also, most series don't last that long anymore. I mean, a 12-issue series is considered a shocking success. And that's that's going to stand in the way of those kind of long payoff stories.
Yeah. And I mean, we know that you love your long stories. You said that, you love your long runs and stuff. And I'm curious, you kind of touched on this already. You said before that at least right now in your career, you're at the point of where you're not chasing things down. Like if, especially from the big two, like Marvel and DC, like you're not kind of pursuing them. So I'm curious, with Death of the Venom Verse, that's kind of, encapsulating a lot of stories into this kind of a little event. So I'm curious, what was that process like, getting you to come back and doing that? They must have had a real good pitch to get you to do that, huh?
Well, it wasn't even that they had a great pitch. They just emailed me and said, hey, it's the 30th, 25th, whatever anniversary of Venom. Would you like to come back, since you did the first two sort of VenomVerse and Venomized, and do this big Venom crossover? And they said, we want to call it Death of the Venom Verse. And they had an idea of, that it was Carnage doing something. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I got to be honest, and I don't know if this is a popular opinion or not, but it's probably not popular for me to say. But once I write one of these characters, I can't read the next writer's stuff. And I haven't read a Venom book since I left. I mean, here and there, I picked it up, and I kept up with what Donnie was doing, and I knew what was going on. And it's not that I don't think they're good books. Clay Chapman wrote the Scream series, and as far as Clay's a great writer, but I couldn't read it. And it's not that I don't think they're good books. It's just very difficult for me. It's almost like you're dating this girl in high school, and then she dumps you, and you don't want to hang out with her and her new boyfriend.
Yeah. Well, you've talked that you get very invested, like, in your characters, especially the ones that you're writing. So that's kind of why I wanted to ask about Death of the Venomverse, because again, with that on top of you talking about, again, like, you're not really searching for those kind of things, I was interested on how that came about, and again, like, your return to Venom.
It was the editor reaching out, and like I said, I love it. I figured, Death of the Venomverse, I can at least put Mania in this. It's Mania can be in it in some way. And even then, I put Mania in it, and that was a big fight because Mania had a bigger role in the book, and the editors just did not want her in the series. They just didn't want her in. So they were like, why don't you kill her? And I was like, I don't like that.
No.
I don't love that. So I was like, okay, well, maybe if I can bring silence into it, at least I'm still, I'm not killing Andy. I'm killing and Andy, and not not Andy Prime or whatever it would be. But yeah, I get very invested, and that's why I wanted to do the book, because I just love those characters. But yeah, it's tough for me to read these stories once I'm done, only because and I'm not saying I never will, and eventually I will, I'm sure, but I just it's tough for me. I love these characters. I don't want, even characters I don't like when I first start writing them. If I really get into it, I start really, I really connect with those characters, and I don't want to let them go. And it's probably something I shouldn't do, and I maybe should have taught myself not to do this. I get like a creator-owned mentality towards these characters, and they're not creator-owned. They're not creator-owned characters. So it can be that to me has always been a big struggle, because as far as I'm concerned, Sinestro's my character. Magneto, yep, my character. I don't care that they've been around longer than I have. They're my characters.
Well, I totally understand that. I mean, while I'm not a comic book writer, I can totally understand that, because it's like you grow up loving comics, loving these characters, and then you get a chance to put your stamp on it. How can you not get just so personally involved? And it kind of reminds me, we had Jackson Lansing on a little while ago, and he kind of talked about when writing Steve Rogers, how it almost kind of felt like when he would write Steve's dialogue, it was like Steve was talking through him. It wasn't really him writing it. And I feel like, again, writing any character, you're getting into that character's mind space and their thoughts and feelings and all that stuff. So I can, like I said, only imagine how hard it is to get out of that mind space and, like you said, let that go. I think that's totally, like I said, understandable.
Yeah, it's there's nothing. It's just the way I'm wired, so there's nothing I can do about it. But I kind of wish there was a way to turn that off. Yeah,
if it makes you feel better. Clay credited you as a massive inspiration for his Scream, and it was a very well done book in that. He brought some old school horror elements into it. There's definitely some body horror in there with it. I think you'd enjoy it for a fun read for Halloween.
I'm sure I would. Clay is an amazing writer. I love his prose. So there's no doubt I'd love seeing him write that character, but it's tough. Oh man, my old girlfriend's boyfriend's
Yeah.
amazing. I sure love that.
That honestly
Well-
might make it worse though. Like
might.
if it was a shitty book, it might be easier to be like, oh yeah, well it's kind of shitty. But if it's a good book, that might make you feel a little worse.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it would probably. I think either way, I'd feel bad about it.
Well, and you mentioned having a creator-owned contact mentality, and I think that's an excellent segue into where like a lot of your work has been over the years, because you haven't been writing a lot for the big two. You've been doing more things that feed you and your process as a writer, things from Six Gun, Shadow Roads. Everybody knows Harrow County. Actually, where I'm at in Tulsa, Harrow County is their #1 recommended comic book at the local library that we have
Oh,
here
that's awesome.
for people for Halloween right now. It's huge. Blood Feud was really good. In recent years, you've had Eden, Rogue Planet, Basilisk, Nightwalker super recently. Let's talk about all those for a second, because you deal a lot with that in horror. Obviously, that's what you're known for. And you've said before, humor shouldn't come from the monsters. The humor needs to come from us, right? In referencing the human characters, and there's definitely quite a bit of the humor coming from it, but also in some of those stories, the horror, right? I have Basilisk behind me, perfect example right now, and the horror very much came from the hearts of who we are as people.
Yeah. Basilisk in particular is a book where it's that story's dealing like with these godlike characters. These 5 characters have these insane abilities, and really one of them may be moving towards literal godhood in a way. But what makes them dangerous is not their power, it's their sort of their attitudes and the the things that drive them, sort of the loneliness and the anger that drives them, and the hubris that drives them along. And on the other side of Basilisk is one character who's really consumed by guilt, and then 2 characters who are consumed by guilt, but then one who's also, their guilt becomes this hunger for revenge, and
Right.
these are all human emotions that these are all emotions that if you let them control you, you go down a dangerous path. And that's what Basilisk was about, is these folks, these people who are, all of them, every main character in Basilisk is consumed by sort of these heightened emotions that take them into extremely dangerous territories.
I loved it. It was in my top 10 books of last year. In fact, I think it was my number 2 or 3 for books for last year when we did our end of year recap. I was shocked when I went to the comic book shop and they said, "Hey, this is the last issue, right?" And I said, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, no, he wanted this to be the end." And I'm like, "I wanted 3 more volumes. What are you talking about?"
I'm pretty sure you texted me on that day, and I wasn't even reading Basilisk at the time, and he was like, "Dude, it's the last issue." And I'm like, "What?"
Yeah, Boone came to me with this idea years ago about these 12-issue runs. That let's do these 12-issue maxi series. And I did a book called Bone Parish, which Jonas Scarf, who drew Basilisk, drew Bone Parish as well. 12-issue series. Basilisk was always intended to be 12-issue series, and I got to tell you, I like that format. Would I have preferred a 32-issue series of Basilisk? Yep. But I like knowing that I have 12 issues and I know where the story ends and I know what's going to happen. And yes, Basilisk ends on a note that it could have continued. I could have continued that story. Same with Bone Parish. I could continue that story. But I'm also happy with where they end. I was just talking to a publisher about a horror project, and he said, can we promise each other that this thing will end without any ambiguity? I was like, you don't know me and you don't know horror. I'm not going to end it without any ambiguity. I need a little bit. I need people to want more. They may never get it, but I want them to want it.
Need to leave them with a little something on the tip of their tongue, right? But that kind of leads in perfectly. You're touching on something I wanted to ask you about, sort of your creative process when you're developing these stories, especially horror stories. So you said, like basically when an idea sparks, you just start kind of free writing and outline all about your outlines and stuff. But I'm curious. We talked to another horror writer, and he talked about something I thought was very interesting, and basically talking about the kind of tools that you use as a horror writer to sort of build tension, and like, where like in a horror movie you have things like the music and the score that all kind of adds to that feeling of creepiness or the scares. So I'm curious, in your process when you're doing these outlines and you're starting from an idea, how do you kind of go about building that tension in your stories, and like I said, having that creep factor when you're not having all the kind of tools that typical horror stories have?
Right. Yeah. So you don't get the jump scare in a comic, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you're never going to get that, but you can control the pace in a comic in such an interesting way. And I mean, I was just writing a script today, and I was like, what am I doing with this scene? Why am I doing it this way? And I realized, oh no, I'm slowing it. I'm slowing. It was it's an action heavy scene, but I kept cutting to this, these certain visual elements that are still and just stagnant element that I kept intercutting to. And it's a way to kind of slow the scene down, to give the reader a second to wonder what to kind of think about the bigger picture. It's not just somebody getting murdered, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
there are other things to consider. So there's a lot you can do with panels in terms of slowing down a scene and really controlling the pacing. One of the things I don't love in horror comics is if it's and this is the way they've been written. When I was a kid, I loved horror comics, but they were always like this. It's just one panel here, and then all of a sudden, boom, the horror is right in your face, and it's there's no build up, there was no sort of foreshadowing of it,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have to decide, how much am I going to foreshadow what's about to happen? How much am I just going to surprise you with it? And you've got and some writers disagree with me on this, but I will stand by the idea of the turn of the page being your biggest potential for surprise. I don't like putting a surprise on the facing page. I want any big surprises, big twists to be when you turn that page, is the first time you see it. And like I said, there are other writers who are very, very talented writers who, I've had the debate with. They're like, it's not necessary, it doesn't matter. But I still, for me, it does. For me telling these stories. And I think there's the key, is I just have to decide what works for me. And that's what's going to work in my mind. There's the hubris. That's what's going to work for the reader, is whatever works for me, and telling this and pacing it out. So yeah, I try to do a lot of things with pacing. I think the fear element can come through if you really like a character. If the reader likes a character, they're going to worry that something terrible is going to happen to that character. And that's where you're going to get any kind of anything resembling real fear, is by having people worry about the fate of the characters that they're interacting with in the page. All creativity, all creative projects is a collaboration. Even if I were even writing a novel, for instance, that's a collaboration with the reader. The reader has to be willing to participate in this process. I just went to a haunted house with my kid and some of his friends. And I remember one of his friends was like, "I'm not scared. No, they can't scare me." And I remember one of my son's friends says, "Look, if you're going to go in this haunted house with that attitude, you're not going to have fun. You got to go in and be willing to be scared." I was like, "Yeah, that's true. Go into this, so I try to approach things that I read or I watch. I'm a collaborator in that. So I've got to be, I got to open myself up to what's about to happen." And
That's a smart kid.
It actually took me aback when I heard. I was like, "Wow, they know what they're talking about." You gotta be willing to be scared or to participate in that story. And that's across the board. It's every creative process is a collaboration to some degree.
I like that you mentioned that. You mentioned you enjoy the 12 issue format, but I feel as a reader of a lot of your work, you have exceeded all my expectations for minis in the last few years, particularly as like 4 and 5 issue minis you've done some of, right? Nightwalkers was an incredibly condensed short pace on vampires so far with it all, right? But Trauma Team that you did for Cyberpunk 2077, I praise that all the time. And when you mention it being a collaboration, something I found great about that book is your writing and Miguel Valderrama's art together has this incredible way of portraying PTSD in a way that makes people feel it when it comes off the page. I have bought more volumes of that than any other comic because the people who I loan it to be like, hey, read this, end up so in love they don't want to give it back.
It's Trauma Team's such a weird project for me because when Dark Horse reached out to me about it, I used to play the pen and paper role playing game for Cyberpunk when I was much younger, and I was like, I don't know if it's exactly right for me, and I pitched 4 or 5 ideas for that series. And Trauma Team was in there, but it wasn't my favorite. It wasn't the one I was hoping they'd pick. And then they did. They said, well, we like this one. I was like, all right, well, how am I going to make this a comic that works? And really, it was in the writing of it. I was like, I realized, yeah, because on one level, okay, it's, sort of like Dread or The Siege or, something like that. I was like, but the PTSD of it is really what makes it an interesting book, I think. And one of the things it kind of bums me out a little bit is I think there are readers who would really dig that story, but they probably didn't pick it up because they don't know Cyberpunk 2077, and they don't have to. I mean, I feel like it's a story anybody could read, but I worry sometimes because it says Cyberpunk 2077 up there, people are like, oh, I don't play that game. I don't know anything about that world, and you really don't need to. Because it ended up being, when I first took it, I was like, okay, this is going to be it'll be a fun project, but I didn't necessarily see it as, I didn't expect it to be the project it was. I didn't expect it to have to be more than a fun project. And I feel like it is. No, once it was all said and done.
It's I love the story. I haven't been able to stop recommending it to people since it came out. It has an interesting way of ending in a way that's bleak yet hopeful, right? Which is very fitting for the world of Night City as a whole. I know Bartos has been doing a lot with the Cyberpunk comics for them. I gotta say, I would love to see you back behind the wheel of another comic set in that universe.
It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that story. They sent me it's on another shelf. Let's see if it was behind me. They sent me a statue, a Cyberpunk statue, which was awesome. Because it's this giant statue of Trauma Team, and their helmets have the names of my characters on the helmets.
Damn, that's dope.
Wow, that's awesome. I've got I've made a mark on Trauma Team forever. But the statue, by the way, you should look it up sometime because it is just what a crazy world where Trauma Team gets a statue, and it's a great statue because I mean they're EMTs, they're an emergency medical team, but here they are, on this giant statue, and surrounded by bullets and blood and everything else. It's pretty intense.
Oh, that's so awesome. And I mean, we're huge fans of Cyberpunk over here. Gorgon actually got me into it. We did an episode all about Cyberpunk and he kind of schooled me on it. But I remember though, from the stories he was telling me, Trauma Team was 100% the one that I was most interested in. And I think I would urge everyone out there to go off what you were saying. Like, you don't need to know Cyberpunk to jump into the story. I knew nothing about Cyberpunk and I jumped right into it and I loved it. So don't let that deter you from reading the book. Like you were saying, like, it's just a good ass book, whether it is set in the Cyberpunk world, but you don't have to be an expert by any means to get into it. But I love it.
Yeah, I tried to make it pretty, any project I do that's like a licensed character, or something with a bigger world, I try to make it as easy access as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Again, because just like I said, every character is somebody's favorite character. Every book is somebody's first issue, and I want people to be able to enjoy a book if they just happen to pick it up off the shelf and they've never read a comic before, but something about the cyberpunk cover speaks to them.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be able to enjoy the book.
Absolutely. And I love that attitude. And that kind of leads us perfectly into another thing we wanted to bring up very quickly before we start getting into your newer stuff. So we just talked about Cyberpunk, which obviously, like you said, tabletop game, video game. There's talks that it's going to be a live action series now, which fingers crossed that Trauma Team, maybe some of those storylines make it in there.
That'd be pretty awesome.
That would be amazing. But that it reminds me also, you also do have a movie out. Not you didn't direct it, but The Empty Man, which I actually watched, not knowing it was one of your stories. I just like popped up on the Prime, and then I was like, oh shit, this is a Bunn joint. I texted Gorgon. I'm like, oh my God, Cullen Bunn has a movie, The Empty Man. So I'm curious, one, what was that experience like? Because I feel like I saw something where you were talking about it was kind of a so-so experience working with that movie, and I'm just curious, like, how does that process kind of work?
I mean, it was a fine experience. It came about pretty early on after Empty Man, the first series came out, and Boom contacted me and said, we want to make this movie. We have a director and writer in mind. We have we want to get a script done. And it was a fine experience. I don't think so-so is the right way to put it, but I would have liked it if I had done it today. I would have wanted to be more involved. Mm-hmm. And there's the only thing, and they kept me involved. I saw, I don't know how many versions of the script, and I saw so many different versions of the movie, so many cuts of the movie. So they were always asking, for my input on things. I would have liked to have been a little more involved, and that was just me being a relatively new writer and not wanting to rock the boat too much. Mm-hmm. Because rocking the boat can make sure the movie doesn't get made at all. I think in the end, do I like when it got released in theaters? Nope. Because it came out in theaters the first week of lockdown for the pandemic.
Oh, geez.
So it was
terrible timing.
It was the worst. And I mean, of course, we can't predict when those things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. Nobody can predict that. But I'm happy to see, in streaming, it's gotten more of a following and everything. The movie could have done, I think it would have done a lot better if it hadn't come out when it did. I think the commercials for the movie made it. I think if you watch the trailers for the movie, it looks like a very different movie. Mm-hmm. And I think, as far as an adaptation goes, I think it's a great movie. I don't think it's necessarily a great adaptation of the comic. I think the comic and the movie are very different, and that's fine. Someone I just saw on Twitter, like maybe, or on Blue Sky, somewhere on social media, someone wrote that they thought the comic is a great sequel to the movie. And I get what they were saying. I was like, oh, mm-hmm. I see exactly what they're suggesting and why it would connect in that way. It wasn't intended that way. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, all in all, I think it's a great movie. I just and look, I wish there was a physical release. I wish there was a Blu-ray somewhere of it. I have mine. I got it out of Redbox, but
just grabbed it and didn't bring it back.
No. Redbox sells. They sell their DVDs eventually.
Oh, okay. Bunn was like, "This one's mine." Redbox, sorry. But that kind of leads. I was curious, which I know. This probably isn't happening, but if it is, I know you can't say anything about it. But speaking of your experience with movies and your work being adapted into movies, we were talking about this, which this is another one that it was like, I've read this story, but I wasn't aware it was yours until we were talking about it. You did Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, which is like, I mean, in my mind at least, I'm not a Deadpool expert by any means, but that's like one of the Deadpool stories. And there's lots of talks and murmurs of that kind of loosely being adapted for this new Deadpool movie. So again, I know if you were involved with it, you couldn't say anything about it, but I'm just curious if that were hypothetically in the realm of possibility, and especially with all of the, the age of the MCU that we live in, would that be something that interests you to kind of go and play in that realm?
Well, sure, absolutely. And look, go buy Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. It might be the movie. Who knows? You need to prepare yourself. I want people to
you
buy
heard
that
it here
book.
right now from Bunn himself.
But if I'm being honest, no one's ever said that to me. I've seen
Mhm.
all the rumors and I've seen the pictures, that maybe it is, but
Mhm.
that would be pretty awesome, I think. But I have not heard that is the case. So how's that?
That's like I said. I knew we wouldn't get a solid answer for you. I'm more so just asking.
People should go buy that book, and
Yeah.
they should, and they can decide. It's an interesting book for me because it's one that people either love or, man, they don't hate the book, but they sure as hell hate me for writing it. I mean,
I love that book.
I get
That's crazy.
I get so much. I still, to this day, I think the book came out over 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, it's been a minute.
I still get people who are just so damn mad about that book, and mainly because of Spider-Man in the book. But sorry. I mean, I also feel like if you buy a book with the title Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, I gotta do what the title promises. I mean, the title's a promise. I can't just not kill the Marvel Universe.
Exactly, especially Spider-Man. Like you said, Marvel Universe. That's like, you think of Spider-Man when you think that. You gotta get it.
It's interesting because it was one of Marvel's best-selling books it still is, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For a long time, it was like always top of the Marvel charts. I was like, so somebody likes to see Deadpool kill in the Marvel Universe. I mean,
yeah.
But
like I said, in my mind, that's like one of the Deadpool stories. Like, I feel like even if you've never read a Deadpool comic, you know of Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. Like, it's iconic.
And I get it. I get why people don't like it. I get, or might not like it, to see their favorite characters getting killed. We just talked about every character somebody's favorite.
Yeah.
You don't want to see Spider-Man getting his brains blown out, but I'm afraid that's what you're going to get in Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe. And but the good news is it's an alternate. It's multiverse. That seems to be the excuse for everything now. Multiverse.
Exactly. It's the multiverse, baby. Anything and everything is canon. It's all possible.
Yeah. Well, but no, it would be neat.
Well, in the multiverse of cinema, you've had The Empty Man become a movie, right? You've have potentially some of your work being inspiration for Deadpool 3, right? If the internet is right for its rumors. Wink.
I hope for once I hope they are.
You have an incredible Halloween movie countdown going on your website. You started back in September the 1st, and I'm curious, do you have any other work you've wrote that you would love to see get made into a show or a movie? I know fans would love to see a show of Harrow County or Basilisk go on for a few seasons, but do you have any you've wrote that would be your dream?
Oh, all of them. They all need to be produced as film.
Cut the check. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, there are several that I mean, it's not a joke. I'd love to see any of it get adapted. But there are, I'm looking over at my bulletin board, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of my projects currently in some form of development. And that it can mean nothing, though, because that doesn't mean it's gonna get anywhere. I mean, since I started working in comics, there's always been something in development. There's always been a project in development. It's just it can be challenge to get the ball across the goal line. You know, there is really comes the same with doing comics in general. There are 1,000 things that will stand in the way of anything ever hitting the shelf. And when, you know, movies and TV, it's the same thing. Just there's, you know, a million things standing in the way of it ever happening. But yeah, you know, there's always a ton of stuff in the works. And some of it, you know, some of it's very early in processes. Some of it is, you know, much farther down the line. And you know, I'm just you know, we'll wait and see.
Fingers crossed.
I'll keep my fingers crossed.
That leads us perfect towards our next topic we like to get with writers, and when they come on, is what do you have in the works right now and coming up? And you just had Legacy of Violence Volume 2 come out.
Yeah, Legacy of Violence. It's another 12 issue story that I'm doing with Mad Cave. It's a weird one for me because it is a straight slasher story. I mean, there's some weird stuff going on behind the, you know, in the background of the story, but it's a real world slasher. There's no supernatural elements to fall back on and protect me with.
Yeah. Well, we were lucky enough to read Volume 2 a little early, and I mean, I really enjoyed it. I caught up with Volume 1 as well. And like you said, it's just a straight up slasher, but you also got like a thriller kind of mystery going on in the background, which I really am loving. And I'm curious, I know that you're a fan of horror in general, obviously, but I know you're a fan of slashers in particular. So I'm curious, what was the process like creating your own slasher? And not only creating your own slasher, but you kind of touched on this a little bit before with like building the tension. Again, there's this kind of mystery going on in the background, and I'm curious, how do you go about laying out that mystery through, like, we're talking about these 12 issues? Like, how do you know, like, oh, I'm giving away too much, or I need a little bit more here? How does that kind of work?
Well, it was nice. You know, to some degree, I would have almost said, oh man, 12 issues is too much for, you know, a slasher story. You know, I don't know if I need that. But having 12 issues allowed me to really pace that out and take my time with it. You know, I try to have sort of a big shocking moment, at least one in every issue. But I was able to really take my time with it. And the mystery that's kind of unfolding in the background is how I didn't want it to be just like any slasher movie. I wanted, or slasher character. I needed something to set it apart. And that mystery is what I thought would be, that was sort of the tool to set the rest of that story apart. And then it was just drawing on you know, and I'm not a huge slasher. I do like slashers. I probably more now than I did even 5 or 6 years ago. I never considered myself a big slasher guy. But I think I am probably more so than I used to believe. But I wanted to draw on like Giallo and things like, rather than straight you know, American, you know, slashers. I wanted it to have, and that's what I think gives it that sort of thriller vibe versus, you know, the unstoppable shape kind of vibe.
Yeah, 100%. It's more kind of like I mean, like you said, thriller, like mystery, like this guy, the slasher of the story, there's no name for him, at least yet, correct? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
Did I miss it?
There is no name for him. I think even in the script I just call him the Killer.
Yeah, or Skullface or whatever.
I don't give him like, you know, a cool slasher name. He does talk, but he's not cracking wise in the story. And it's not a story where there's not a lot of lightheartedness in Legacy of Violence. It's a pretty grim story.
Grim, and it's definitely pretty gruesome, but I really, like you said, the Killer, I'm gonna call him Skullface because I like that. But so like you said, he doesn't talk very much in the story, but when he does speak, I really love the way that you wrote his character, where, like you said, it's not necessarily like the Michael Myers, like unstoppable shape, or even like Jason Voorhees. It's much more, at least in my opinion, like methodical, and like there's, again, going back to the mystery kind of theme of the book, like there's more at play here, and like he's like playing this definitely sick and twisted game, but it is kind of like a game to him. And I think
Right.
it's just he's, while a man of few words, he's a very interesting character.
And I feel like the mystery of who he is and where he's coming from, that informs the way I tried to write him. So it all plays into where it's going. Hopefully, I hope that's the way it all ends up. When it's all said and done, it works for the readers.
Well, I can't wait to find out who it is. I've been racking my brain. I was reading it last night again before we hopped on here, and I was like, man, I'm trying to think of who it is. And next issue is going to be in January, correct?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So I cannot wait to find out who Skullface is. Anyone out there listening or watching this, like we said, that came out, the second volume came out last week on the 11th.
What if they take the skull off and it's just another skull?
Oh,
Calm down,
now that would
Scooby-Doo.
be a
Calm down.
twist. Now that would be a twist.
You have a lot of other work coming out here pretty soon. You've been promoting pretty heavy Crooked Hills, your new book you have coming out that you're writing on Kickstarter, not a comic, which you've kind of described as Abbott and Costello meeting Frankenstein, Stranger Things meeting Paper Girls, Goonies on Blair Witch. Tell us a little bit about that, what you can, and maybe some of your other stuff coming up, like the Midnight Show or Retroverse with Dark Horse.
Yeah. Yeah, Crooked Hills is currently, I don't know when this airs, but I'm sure it'll still be going on when this airs. But Crooked Hills is on Kickstarter right now. It's a prose novel set in the Missouri Ozarks. It's about a kid who is goes on summer vacation to visit family in the Ozarks and gets embroiled in a story with witches and hellhounds and everything else. It is written with it's an all ages kind of story. So my idea with it is a kid, 8 to 12-year-old, could read this book just fine and enjoy it and get scared and have a spooky good time, but adults could still enjoy it and find something fun to do. A lot of times you say all ages and people just kind of, oh, all ages, that's for little kids, and that's just not how I approach it. But yeah, it's written that kids can enjoy it, adults can enjoy it. And it's the first book in a series that I'm doing with Outland Entertainment. And yeah, on Kickstarter right now. I think it ends on November 2nd is the end of the campaign. And then I'm doing a Midnight Show is a book I'm doing with my longtime collaborator Brian Hurt. That's coming out from Dark Horse. The first issue just came out, and it's kind of what I call popcorn horror. It's just a fun, bloody, actiony horror story about a movie studio that produced a number of sort of classic movies. Dracula, the Wolf Man, the Frankenstein, and they produced all these movies in the 60s and 70s. And their final movie, which was supposed to be this masterpiece that had all the monsters in it, the studio burns down during the filming of the movie. And it's kind of considered this cursed horror film. And then this film festival gets hold of the reels, and they show them as part of a film festival. And as soon as they start showing those reels, these monsters start manifesting around the town and start wreaking havoc. And it's a 4-issue series from Dark Horse, but I think it's just a lot of fun. It's a joy to work with Brian Hurt on a project again, and Bill Crabtree. They both worked with me on the Six Gun, so it's getting the gang back together to do this fun horror story. And then I've got Ghost Lore coming out from Boom right now. I think the first trade paperback just came out for that, which is sort of this epic ghost story. And each issue has its own little. The conceit of the book is what ghost stories do ghosts tell? And so every issue has an ongoing epic storyline, but every issue has a small ghost story included in it as well that's drawn by a different artistic team. So it's kind of got a little bit of an anthology vibe to it, as well as being this bigger story. And then there's just I've got a book coming out from Dark Horse that I'm really excited about next year called Beyond Mortal. It's coming out as an original graphic novel next year. Now, a couple of years back, I ran a Kickstarter for the first issue's worth of that series, and then now Dark Horse is just going to publish the rest of it as a graphic novel, along with that first issue. So you'll have the entire story. But it started out as me creating my own superhero universe. And I created a superhero universe, and I've kind of described Beyond Mortal as what if the Justice League or the Avengers fought the Cthulhu mythos? So it's a story that introduces the whole world of superheroes. And as it starts out, these elder beings are encroaching into our reality. And it's got a lot of superhero action, but it's got a lot of horror in it. It's got a lot of cosmic terror elements. And what's really neat about it, so this first graphic novel tells the first Beyond Mortal story, but Danny Luckert, who is the artist on the book, and I are already working on a spin-off series that Dark Horse is going to be putting out that takes place in the Beyond Mortal universe. And we have another series in the Beyond Mortal universe. So we're really creating our own shared universe that we are going to start telling these, and they're very different kind of vibes, different kind of stories with different heroes. We're introducing new superheroes in really cool ways. And but they all take place in this sort of horror themed version of a superhero world. And so I'm really excited about it. It all starts with this graphic novel that comes out from Dark Horse here in, I can't remember what the date is. Early to mid next year, the first graphic novel comes out, and it's gorgeous because Danny Luckert's an amazing artist. And if you want to see superheroes fighting elder beings and not always faring very well, this is the series for you.
Well, I'm 100% sold on that pitch alone. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Like we said when we started this interview, the Bunn business is booming, my friend. You're a busy man. You got so many books coming out. I do want to really quickly though touch really quick back on Crooked Hill though, just because I'm really excited about that. I was watching you on a friend of the show, Blake's Buzz.
Oh, yeah.
We love Blake, and I heard you talking about it on there. And man, I just think it sounds so cool. I'm super excited. Obviously, we're a comic podcast, but I love reading, regular novels as well. And I'm, like I said, I'm really excited for that. I love the cover of the book. You got that big dog on there. It literally looks like my dog that I have. So I was like, oh my God, there's Thor on the cover.
Yeah,
I got to get this book.
Wait, your dog's name is Thor?
Yeah, my dog's name is Thory / Thor.
Well, so not to digress, but I have to note there is a book called Thor. Have you read this book called Thor? That's a werewolf novel.
There's a werewolf novel called Thor, and I haven't read it. Tell me more.
The author's name is I hate that I can't remember. I think it's Wayne Smith or Smythe. Wayne Smith. The novel is called Thor.
What?
It's about a German Shepherd that this family, and he has to protect his family from this werewolf. There's a movie adaptation too.
I feel like I saw a movie like that. I might have seen the movie.
It's called Bad Moon. The movie's Bad Moon. It's not called Thor. But yeah.
What? That's crazy.
If you have a big dog named Thor, you should.
I have a Belgian Malinois / German Shepherd. So
all right. Well, you should watch Bad Moon, and you should read Thor for sure.
That's why you're blowing my mind right now. I don't know how I have not read this, but yeah, like I said, I wrote it down right now, so when I get off of here, that's definitely what I'm going to be doing. But
Yeah.
back to Crooked Hills, though, with the dog in that story, like I said, I'm super excited. And again, going back to the description, I mean, Stranger Things meets Paper Girls. That's all I need to pick up the book. That alone, like, again, just sells me on that 100%. And I think it all kind of goes back to, you were talking about, a lot of it is from your experience, growing up in these small kind of rural towns. And I wanted to ask you too, I thought I heard you say that this was actually one of the first short stories that you wrote, like when you started writing novels and short stories, but didn't really develop it. Is that true, or did I misread that?
No, this one, that's actually Harrow County was a short story I
Okay.
started and I never finished, and then I ended up doing it as a comic.
Okay, I must have got them mixed up.
Yeah. Well, but so Crooked Hills is something I wrote. The first book is something I wrote a long time ago, and it came out from a very small publisher, and it went out of print very quickly. So that's one of the reasons I'm glad we're able to do it now. Outland's able to do it. We can kickstart it and get it out there again for folks and do what I've always wanted to do with it, which is tell a longer, a series of books.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's got a lot of that kind of backwoods horror vibe to it. And Gorgon, you said earlier how I've said, it's important that, if it's a book with fun and humor in it, that it's not from the monsters. And this is that
Mm-hmm.
kind of deal. The villains and the monsters in this book they're playing for keeps, and they're not funny, they're not humorous characters, but there's a lot of humor and heart in it, because these kids are dealing with it, and they're dealing with it as kids do.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was easy to get that sense of fun and adventure and joking, even though the monsters in the book are, like I said, they're serious business. They're not
they're not joking around.
They're not joking around, and it's just something I've, and we say Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, and that movie has always spoken to me, because Abbott and Costello are full of jokes, and all the humor comes from them, not from any of the Universal monsters who are
Mm-hmm.
kind of stalking around. They're all just scary monsters, and I can get behind that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite Halloween movies as well.
Oh, yeah,
so when
sure.
I was hearing you talk about that and I heard you shout that out, I was like, again, okay, 100%, you got my money. I'm excited for this. But you said that's gonna be the Kickstarter ends on November 2nd for that.
Right.
So everyone listening and watching, please go back that on Kickstarter. I will be throwing the link to that in the description here. And this will actually be coming out as our kind of Halloween special this year.
Oh, perfect.
So
Yeah,
it'll be out before the Kickstarter ends. So again, if you guys are in the future listening to this, go on Kickstarter right now, back it, because I'm super excited to read it. Everything I've heard you talk about it just makes me even more and more excited for it. And I can't wait.
And the book's written, so it's going to fulfill relatively quickly. You're not going to have to wait a year to get this book. It's
Mm-hmm.
The book's written, the designs have been done, edits have been done, everything's ready to go on the book. It's just as soon as we can get, as soon as the funding gets cleared through Kickstarter, we're going to hit the ground running.
Stay ready to cook with gas. And then also, I just want to mention very quickly, you also have some really awesome tiers available for the Kickstarter. There's original artwork for the chapters. One of them is actually a sneak peek for the next volume of the Crooked Hills for the next book, which, come on, guys, going back this book. So I need more. I haven't even read the book yet, and I still need more, and I want more already. So
yeah, we've got some cool things. We've got one of the things I really like pledge level wise is you can actually buy a copy for your library. So you get your copy and we'll send a copy to the library of your choice. There's a level where I will we have Crooked Hills postcards, and I will hand write on the back of the postcard a one-of-a-kind Crooked Hills short story that only you will have. So there's some things that are that's the one that scares me. We did a book called Raise. Was one of the first things I did with Outland. and I offered up a bunch of these postcards, like 40 or 50 of them. Writing 50 of those stories, I was like, oh God, because I was realizing I got to come up with a new story. So that slowed me down a little bit. Crooked Hills, the stories will come a little easier, I think, than they did for Ray's. But yeah, we're doing. I mean, and it's a very limited. I'm not doing as many of them as I did with Ray's, but I think it's a fun. I think it's a fun project level, just because you will get something that no one else has. For the ones I did with Ray's, I took a picture of them, so I would always, I always remembered I'd handwrite it and I took a picture so that I'd have the story for my archives. But that's it. That's where it will exist. You'll have a one-of-a-kind story.
That is so awesome. Like I said, I cannot wait for that. Everyone go back that so we can get, I want my own little short story. I don't know about you guys, but I want mine. So like I said, go back that so we can all enjoy this great story and this universe that Mr. Bunn is creating. But that, I mean, we both could sit here and talk to you all day long and talk about all your work. Again, the Bunn business is booming more than ever. We could sit here and talk about all the great stuff you're doing. But I do want to ask you, since again, this is kind of going to be our Halloween special episode, something you touched on when we were just talking about Abbott and Costello and the kind of Hollywood movie monsters. You're writing them a little bit in the Midnight Show that you were just talking about with the movie studio and all that. But I'm curious, we've been talking about these long runs and like short runs and all that. And a question that we typically ask people is like, what's a character you would love to write for? I want to know if you could have a long form run of any classic Hollywood monster, like Dracula, Invisible Man, Wolf, any one of them. Which one would you pick? And like I'm talking like 30, 40 issues, like a good.
And you're talking about like one of the key classics, right?
Well, I mean, it could be a deep cut too. I know you're a fan of the Blob. We could throw the Blob out there. The Thing.
I don't think the Blob supports a long running series.
Who knows?
I think the Thing could support a long running series, and that might be cool. I have big dreams of doing a Phantasm series, and I think a Phantasm series could be a long running comic. If we're talking the Universal monsters, I would say Dracula, but it's tough to beat Tomb of Dracula as a long running, vampire comic. So I'm not gonna even try to compete with that masterpiece of a comic. So I might say the Creature from the Black Lagoon, just to see what you can do.
That.
It might be cool. Look, one of those movies in the Creature from the Black Lagoon franchise, I can't remember how many there were, but one of them's really bad. I mean, it's like they like cut the creature's gills off and they turn it. He can walk on land and stuff, and they put him in a jumpsuit. I'm like, come on. No,
I feel like that's the second one, but I could be wrong.
It's really, I think it's The Creature Walks Among Us, but I can't remember which one it was. What a terrible that one was. But I think it might be cool to explore some mythology around that creature and where he, where he came from, and it's just pages and pages and issues of the creature reaching out for people's feet and almost touching them. That's just
just the 30 issues of just almost.
Imagine the cover. In this issue, the creature finally touches a foot, and that's
issue 30. He finally gets her.
Right.
But I love that. I'm a huge fan of the Hollywood, original movie monsters, Universal monsters. Yeah. And I mean, everyone picks, Wolfman, Dracula. I've personally always had a special place for the Creature of the Black Lagoon. So I love that's who your pick was.
Well, the creature just had such a cool design and was, it's just an interesting, I think it could provide a really interesting setting, and really the creature does not have a backstory the way Dracula does or Frankenstein does. It's just a creature. But where did he come from? What's his deal?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the one that if that ever happened, that'd be kind of cool. Just a long running Creature from the Black Lagoon series. I'm down.
I love it.
Well, before we get out of here today, Mr. Bunn, I do have to ask for my own satisfaction. I am kind of you mentioned earlier that any character you write could end up being somebody's favorite character, right? That's kind of how that works. And I'm kind of known on Twitter for being the world's biggest New 52 Lobo fan, which sadly for me ended with that man trapped in a jar. Technically, he is still alive in a glass jar.
I don't
Is
like
there
that
any
glass
hope
jar.
for a
I don't like
deranged
that.
fan that he'd break out of that jar ever?
I would so even though I said earlier I don't chase Marvel and DC as much anymore, I within the last few weeks put a Lobo pitch together that I don't think it'll happen, but I would really love to see it happen. And it goes back to when I took on that Lobo. I've said this elsewhere. My original pitch was love him or hate. I like him. I love him. But we do call him Sparkly Lobo because that's an easy, he's the sparkly version of Lobo. My original pitch for that was that Lobo or Sexy Lobo or Sparkly Lobo.
I like Sexy Lobo.
Sexy Lobo. I love
like Sexy Lobo.
The original pitch I had for this series was Sexy Lobo and Main Man Lobo were brothers, and they were flying through the universe in like a souped up space Impala or something, and they were going on bounty hunter jobs together, and they hate each other, but they're brothers, they're stuck together, and I kind of had an odd couple vibe to it, and I still think there's a place for that story in the world. I think that's an interesting take, and it'd be interesting to see those two play against each other. So I within the last 2 weeks I put a pitch together for that to revisit that. I don't think it's something that will ever happen. But you know who didn't like Sexy Lobo? The great Keith Giffen, who we just lost in the last week. He was not a fan of Sexy Lobo, but he was always cool with me when we talked about it. He's like, I don't like that version of Lobo, and I get it. Even though I would say he was closer to the version that Giffen created than the Main Man was, but
I would agree personally. I mean, it's one of the only New 52 stories that starts off with the new person beheading their former self, right? That's
it was a weird one from that point of view. And boy, talk about getting hate.
Yeah, right out the gate.
That was one I knew, and I knew people wouldn't like it, but yeah. So I don't like that Lobo being in a jar. I think that Lobo had potential still, and I'd love to see a world where we could make people love that version of Lobo, because I think a lot of people, he was a great Lobo for people who didn't like the Main Man Lobo and weren't into that version of the character.
Absolutely.
And yeah, but I also would love to see the two characters together, because I think it would be kind of hilarious to see those two playing off each other as they go about their crazy adventures.
Well, especially with Crush in the mix now, there's got to be some way to bring that dynamic into it all. So I think that could be a lot of fun.
It's a whole Lobo family.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Sons of Mjolnir and being part of our family today. We're glad to have you on for it all. We're glad to get to talk with you about your books, your things coming out for you. Do you have anything you haven't promoted that you'd like to, or if not, tell the people where to find you?
Yeah. So, to keep in touch with me, I have a website, which is cullenbunn.com. I do a weekly newsletter that is completely free, comes out every Monday, and I do deep dives into everything that's going on in my life, everything that's going on in my writing process, everything that I've got coming out. You'll get a regular update on that. I have a Patreon. I'm on social, all under Cullen Bunn. So, and you can find all that from, the starting point of my website. You'll be able to get to any of that stuff.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'll be putting all those links in the description under there. I'm going to be putting the links for your Kickstarters, the Crooked Hills. I'm going to
Awesome.
put Legacy of Violence in there. So all the stuff that we talked about, all the great stuff that Mr. Bunn's got going on, go down in the description. You'll be able to find it. If you like this video, consider giving us a like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. And just to echo what Gorgon was saying, Mr. Bunn, we cannot thank you enough for coming and nerding out with us today. This has been an absolute joy. We couldn't have asked for any better. And I mean, again, I could sit here and talk to you all day long. I could pick your brain for hours and hours. But I mean, you have books to write. You got stuff to do. So you got to get out of here, unfortunately. But like I said, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us. Gorgon, is there anything you got left for Mr. Bunn before he gets out of here?
Without sounding like an absolute psycho fan child of your writing, no, I'm just absolutely thrilled to have you here. You're one of our dream guests to have on the show, and it's very surreal to be able to sit here and talk with you to the person who made me care about who's the name behind the comic. So I'm just glad you got to be here. I'm glad that our listeners and viewers get to hear you talk about your work today.
Well, I really appreciate it. It means a lot for you guys to have me on and talk with me. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's going to be all that we have for you today, folks.
Right.
Thank you again to Mr. Bunn for coming and hanging out with us. Again, if you like this video, leave us a like, consider subscribing. We hope that all your stacks are fat this week and that you stay hydrated. And also, happy Halloween, everybody.
Yeah, happy Halloween.
It's been wonderful.